All right, I think we're at 3 o'clock, so let's just go ahead and get started. I would like to welcome all of you for making time for our very important topic today on supplier diversity. My name is Sanjita Pradhan, and I am Program Director of Talent Development at the Greater Des Moines Partnership, and so great to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces here today with us. I'm really super excited about this presentation today. So just a few housekeeping items. Everybody's doing a great job of putting your audio on mute. Please continue to put your audio on mute and continue to put your questions in the chat box. We will certainly take them towards the end of our webinar. This session is being recorded, and we will share this with you once it's available. I do want to take a minute to thank our sponsors of this event today, Iowa Economic Development Authority. So thank you for sponsoring this event today. We do have a great lineup of speakers today that I'm really excited about this webinar. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time introducing them. I'd like you to, each speaker, to please introduce yourself briefly as we move on. So we'll start with you, Kathy, our main keynote speaker here today. So Kathy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathy Porter, and I am a speaker, author, a small business strategist, and it's a pleasure to join you here today. I'd like to thank you, Sanjita, and the Greater Des Moines Partnership and the Iowa Economic Development Authority for having me today. And thank you all for showing up and committing to being a part of this workshop this afternoon. So just to give you a little bit about myself, I'm the author of 2 books, one specifically on supplier diversity, implementing supplier diversity, which came out last year. I am a frequent speaker, panelist, and workshop facilitator at conferences and events focusing on supplier diversity, small business development, entrepreneurship, women's entrepreneurship and empowerment, and diversity and inclusion. I have multi-agency experience, including the federal government, local and state government, higher education institutions, K through 12, and with corporations. I won a couple of awards. I've been recognized as the Supplier Diversity Advocate of the Year for the state of Florida, and I serve on the Florida Advisory Council on Small and Minority Business Development, where we advise the governor on issues that affect small and minority-owned businesses. And lastly, and I think most importantly, I have a successful track record of connecting businesses to receive millions of dollars in contract opportunities. I think this is important out of everything that I've done and the list of accomplishments. This is probably the most important because I think that the more you can attribute your success and attribute what you do to actually connecting businesses to opportunities, the more effective you are as a supplier diversity leader and as a professional. And so that's probably my biggest accomplishment, is being able to connect businesses to real and actual opportunities. So let's just get started. Small business is big business. Big businesses rely on small businesses to provide a variety of goods and services. And as businesses continue to outsource and look for ways to gain a competitive advantage, they rely on small businesses more and more. And so these things are intertwined and interconnected, and there's no way to escape it. So I'm provide you with a roadmap for our presentation this afternoon. First, we're going to get a definition of what it is and what it is not. Then we're going to do a brief history and provide a historical timeline and a model for programs, making the case, the what, why, who, and when, and basic elements for making the business case, getting started, looking at the plan components and program stages, and then an impact circle, what the impact of all of these efforts are. So really quickly, the definition of supplier diversity. So supplier diversity is a business strategy that ensures a diverse supplier base in the procurement of goods and services for any business or organization, and it is an essential part of any diversity and inclusion program. It is not a community relations initiative. That's just one function. And I've seen organizations that house their supplier diversity program in the community relations department, because a large part of what we do is community facing and it's interacting in the community. But this is not a community relations function. It is always going to be different. It's not going to yield the same result for one firm, for one organization, as you would for another. And then finally, it's not a destination. It's a long-term journey and a long-term commitment. You're not going to wake up one minute and say, hey, we're here. This is something, it's a lifestyle choice, as they say, as they keep telling me with my diet, it's a lifestyle choice. And this is a journey for organizations. So just a really quick, a historical perspective. So these programs began in 1969 with Richard Nixon, and much like what we're experiencing today, where there was a lot of civil and social unrest, and he created these programs because he wanted to find a way to help quell and stop the social, or at least address the social unrest. And so looking at economics was where he's spent his focus. So from 1969 to the 1990s, it was really, the programs really focused on compliance with the federal law. The federal government set the standard for how these programs were to work and operate. During the 1990s and the 2000s, as third-party certifying organizations and advocacy groups came about, we started to see people focus on doing the right thing within their communities. And then as we got into the 2000s and present, today, we see organizations talking more about making the business case for supplier diversity and how supplier diversity can add value to organizations. Much like any other industry, supplier diversity has had to evolve and grow, and so we're focused on making the case. Next slide. But today, we're at a crossroads. We're now facing 50 years of supplier diversity programs, and we're looking at what's the next phase. So today, it's less about making the business case and the right thing to do. It's something that you have to do because diversity is a business and economic imperative. We have diverse communities, the fastest growing populations in the country. Diverse consumers are very savvy, and with technology, they're become very even more savvy. They have access to information, and they want to know what's happening with the brands and companies that they're buying from and doing business with. Despite the gender and racial pay gaps, the spending power of these consumers still continues to increase annually. And so when you have a consumer that is looking beyond just a transaction, but developing that deeper relationship, as well as organizations, you can't overlook how individuals feel about a company and the brands that they're buying from. Next slide. So just the model for modern day supplier diversity. This began in 1974. Maynard Jackson, Atlanta's first Black mayor, met with business leadership, and he told them that they were in the process of building an airport. And he told them if they wanted an airport, they needed to do one thing. He wanted 25% of all contracts to be set aside for minority firms. Now, at the time, this was unheard of. There were no disparity studies and no statutes that allowed businesses that programs had to be based on. And so this was just him recognizing the opportunity and what was happening and the plan for the airport in Atlanta. This was just him saying that in order for us to build this airport, we want to make sure that businesses were a part of this opportunity. Next slide. So, and also in 1974, you could get away with that. Now it would be a lot harder to just set an arbitrary goal and it has to be based on something. But back then, you really had the flexibility to say what you wanted to see happen within your community because you knew the impact that it would make. So the fight here, members of Atlanta's business establishment, they were taken aback because they had never been presented with such a bold statement of what they wanted, what needed to happen for minority businesses to be a part of a project. Jackson told them that he wouldn't build the airport if that minority businesses were not allowed to economically benefit from this coming to the city. They fought about this for 2 years with a lot of the businesses or non-minority businesses. They weren't willing to let this go without a fight. They fought for 2 years. And when you're trying to, he was a disruptor way before the term disruptor became popular. And so when you're trying to make change and fight for change, you're going to get some pushback. And so they were willing to fight for 2 years in order for this in order to make this happen. So for minority businesses, the payoff was too great. This meant that they would get a substantial share of for a project that was valued at $450 million. Next slide. So by 1976, they agreed and they set a goal of 20 to 25% of that project could be set aside for minority firms. He used that time to sell businesses on the concept of joint ventures, as well as reassure minority businesses that they would get something that they had never had before, which was access to a share of contracts on a major public works project. And so this set the stage for how, so number one, we see the impact that having these goals and having these programs can have on a community, but also we see that this is something that we cannot ignore because it impacts the impact is far reaching and it has a wide effect and will impact on generations to come. Next slide. So the result, Jackson increased the percentage of contracts to minorities from less than 1% in 1973 to roughly 39% years later. This strengthened the Black middle class and created an affluent business community that still exists today. And it's one of the reasons this action in itself is one of the reasons Atlanta is considered a hub for Black business achievement and affluence. This model has been replicated all over the country, and it really resulted in the explosive growth and expansion of supplier diversity programs. You cannot overlook modern day supplier diversity without looking at what Maynard Jackson had the foresight to do in Atlanta. So now we get to making the case and how are we talking about this in our organizations. So in order for a supplier diversity program to be successful, you want to base your program on 4 key tiers: social responsibility, economic development, customer expectations, and using this as a competitive advantage for the organization. So with social responsibility, this is still the right thing to do. And it should be a part of a company's strategic fabric, just like sustainability is a part of what an organization does, or even diversity and inclusion. Supplier diversity should be looked at in that same way. In our current social climate of the cancel culture and brand boycotts and corporate call-outs, it's also an opportunity for risk mitigation, because you don't want to be on the wrong side of history or the wrong side of what's happening now in our society. And I want to also point out that these 4 pillars are taken from a colleague of mine, IW Consulting Group. They're a group out of Atlanta, a woman-owned supplier diversity consulting firm out of Atlanta, and I frequently collaborate with them on a variety of supplier diversity initiatives. Next slide. So economic development, engaging minority suppliers for contracting opportunities contributes to the economic development of the community at large. I think you all are well aware of this, which is why you wanted to host this workshop today. And so I applaud you all for really intentionally thinking about the impact that and increasing contract opportunities for small and diverse businesses can have on the entire community. It creates a positive reinvestment back into the community and potentially less impact on resources. When you have a business that is not able to grow or does not have a share of what's happening in a community, then they have to look at other governmental resources in order for them to survive. And so if you're creating an opportunity for them to grow and to succeed, there's less of a reason for them to rely on governmental resources. Next slide. So for a competitive edge, successful organizations use this as a competitive advantage rather than just a nice thing to do. Just like organizations talk about sustainability, which is very popular now, and things that they're doing in their community to improve the community. Supplier diversity is one of those things that also improves the community. When you're working with small businesses, you're able to get cost savings. You're able to get efficiencies in business that you had not thought of as a large organization. You may get some creativity and innovation. And it's this collective thinking and collective group of minds that come together that allow organizations to be successful and have access to resources that they had never even imagined. Might also be required if the organization responds to federal solicitations and grants. When you're working with the federal government, they require that you are working with or have some type of small business inclusion, and they want to have that documented. And so if your organization gets money from the federal government, then it's mandatory. And so this might, and although it is mandatory and you might be required to do this, it still creates an opportunity for small businesses. Next slide. So lastly, we have customer expectations. Customer expectations are shifting as the consumer base gets more diverse, not just from a demographic perspective, but in ideology, awareness, and cultural experiences. They have different expectations from the companies that they buy from. And so understanding this helps you to develop and craft a message that appeals to your consumers. Next slide. So now we get to getting started. How do we make this work, and how do we take this information and put it in our organizations? So first we have to identify the what, the who, the why, and the when. So what's important to your organizations? What are the expected outcomes? Who are the stakeholders that are needed in order to push an initiative like this forward? Who are the stakeholders that are available? Why, what is your why with this program? Is it economic? Is it altruistic? Is it peer pressure? Are you just doing it so that when people ask, what do, you say you have a program? And then when? How long will this take? And what types of resources are you willing to commit to it? And are you willing to work at it as long as it takes to get an initiative like this rolling and to be successful? So some of the first components, you want to look at internal execution and then an external execution plan. So with internally, we want to look at gaining internal allies. Is it senior leadership? Is it your diversity inclusion team? Is it your communication team? Is it internal departments? Do you have departments that are going to support this? Because the departments, when they're making buying decisions, are they going to be able to consider small and diverse businesses? Do you have these stakeholder commitments? And this could come from the community, whether it's economic development groups or your local government or higher education institutions that are within your community. All of these groups are great stakeholders, and all of these groups can help you develop a plan to push your program forward. Also, creating a communication plan so that your organization is aware of what's happening and what's going on. Do you have the resources to create an effective communication plan so that everybody is aware and apprised of this new initiative? Because you can't be successful if it's just one person. This is the village concept, where you need a village in order for this initiative to be successful. And then we look at the external activation piece, understanding your internal processes so that you can communicate those processes to vendors. Understand internal opportunities. What does your organization buy? I know organizations, we buy a lot of different things and a variety of things, but not all small businesses can supply that. So what are the things that your organization buys that small and diverse businesses might be able to supply to you? Articulating the process. When you're talking about how setting up your organization and looking at your processes internally, this is where you really pull the covers back and you see that it might not be as easy as you think to do business with your organization. So I'll give you an example. There was an instance where we're telling people, I was in an organization and we're telling people we have a prompt payment clause, and you can get paid in 10 days after you perform the work. And so going through that process, it wasn't actually 10 days because when a pay request is submitted and then it's approved by several people, if there are issues with it, then it had to go back and be revised and amended, and then it went to an outside company. And once it went to the outside company, then it was fair game for when it would be processed and actually paid. And so what we were promoting as a quick prompt payment or 10-day pay process turned into more than 30 days. And so as a small business, and we're saying you can get paid in 10 days, and we look at the process, it's actually 30 to 45 days, that becomes an issue. And so you want to understand what does it really take and what's really required when doing business within your organization. And then determine the best plan to meet firms. This is where partnerships with other organizations work best. And so how do you even meet these businesses? Are there opportunities within your community that they gather that you can network and meet them? Do you need to host these events? And so understanding how do you even meet small businesses, the first thing a lot of organizations love to say is or departments within an organization say, well, just give us a list of diverse firms. And the problem with that is that if you have a list of firms, and you can create something, but if you have a list of firms, you don't know if a firm is still in business, is out of business, what the status of their business is. And so to give out this list, and you give it out to your organization, and your list, they try to contact a few firms, those firms are no longer in business, then they'll say that your list is not a good list. And so understanding how you meet these firms, sometimes you have to cast your net a little bit wider than your local geographic market. Is it regional? Is it national? What is your reach? Where are these firms located? And that's another reason why you want to be careful with a goal, because if you set a goal, we want to do business with 20% of local firms. If they're not in your geographic area, then it's going to be really hard to reach that. And so how far are you willing to go in order to meet firms that might be able to respond to your opportunities? Next slide. So some other things, a lot of people want a template for a diversity plan, and there is no formal template. You really want to understand what works best for your organization. It should outline how your organization will operate and outline what your organization wants to do. That becomes your template. You can benchmark other organizations, but there is no one template that you need to follow in order for you to be successful. You want to be able to communicate your program objectives, which goes back to that what and who and why and when. What do you want to accomplish with your program? Identify short-term and long-term goals and objectives, which could be conduct a certain number of outreach events and workshops, engage with a certain number of diverse firms, achieve a certain percentage of procurement spend with minority firms. It could be a variety of metrics that you put in place, but what are your short-term goals and what are your long-term goals and objectives? That should be a part of your plan. And then lastly, stakeholder commitments. Who has committed to helping you push your plan within the organization? This should definitely, without a doubt, have a senior leadership component, whether it's the president of your organization or a senior level VP, but someone at the highest level of the organization should publicly state, this is important to us, this is how we're going to operate, and this is what we're going to do. Because it is that level of commitment that lets the vendors and lets the community at large know that you're serious and this is important to your organization. Next slide. So now we talk about program stages, and these should be measured, realistic, and achievable. Benchmarking against leading programs and national programs is recommended, but you should also know that if you are a new a firm that's implementing a new program, you're not going to become a member of the $1 Billion Roundtable overnight. And the $1 Billion Roundtable are these large Fortune 500 organizations that have annual spend of over $1 billion, or they have spent over $1 billion with minority businesses. That takes a long time to get to that point. It's a great goal to have, but you won't get there overnight. So the most common stages are beginning stage, growing, and then mature. So mature programs, beginning would be starting from the beginning. A growing program after 3 to 5 years, you have businesses within your pipeline and you have opportunities to connect them to different things. And then a mature program is a program that has been around for a number of years. So a beginning program, at the very least, you want to have a vendor registration portal. How do businesses first engage and interact with your organization? You want to create and understand your process. Again, how do businesses work with you? You want to have a very clear and distinct process for businesses engaging with your organization. You want to understand and analyze the opportunities within your organization. How do they work with procurement? There has to be a very clear process, and you want to be able to communicate that. And at a minimum, you want to be able to track your tier 1 spend. This is your direct spend with minority businesses. It's not tier 2, which would be subcontracting spend. It's your direct spend and what you're spending with businesses directly. Next slide. So then we get to a growing program. So this is where you have external outreach. Like how are you meeting your businesses? You might have a multi-tier spend tracking and compliance system or at least a process in place. You have cross-departmental collaboration where you're working with the several departments within your organization in order to get the word out about what you're doing and introducing vendors to those departments. You have a strong internal in-reach program, which includes the communication. It includes meetings. It could include an advisory board. It could include a lot of different components, but your internal departments are engaged and fully on board with what you're doing. It includes some basic supplier development. These could be basic how to do business with your organization or meet our prime partners or something like that. It doesn't have to necessarily go in depth. It could be very high level workshops. And again, these business development workshops are designed to keep your businesses engaged with your program and focus on building the relationship. You have a communications program to internal departments and external businesses so that people know what it is you're doing and what you have. And then you're benchmarking. You're looking at other programs to determine best practices. Next slide. And so then we get to a mature program. So it would incorporate all of the above, but now the shift might be a stronger emphasis on supplier development using what I call MODE, which is mentoring, outreach, development, and education. And so this could be where you are partnering large firms with smaller firms to help them understand the process, because it's one thing to get a contract, it's another thing to really understand how the organization works. And until you have a contract, you really don't understand how the organization works. With outreach, this includes having businesses that are on a consistent basis engaging with your program, because I tell businesses you want to build that relationship. It's really hard to get a $1 million contract or even a contract with businesses that an organization does not know, because nobody wants to have a situation where the contractor can't perform. And so focusing on that development and focusing on building that relationship is critical for success on the other side. The development is just the vendor development, really developing vendors to be successful with the organization, and then education program. What does the education program that your organization offers looks like? So I say this, entrepreneurship is one of the few industries where you don't necessarily have to go to school in order for you to say that you're an entrepreneur. You can wake up the next day and say that you're an entrepreneur. It doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. And so sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And when you start a business, you don't know what you don't know. And so it is our job and our role to show these businesses how doing business with our organizations and our programs, how it really works. You with the mature program, you want to have a compliance program. You want to, which allows you to track your subcontracting performance. It also allows you to you're tracking your direct spend and your first tier spend. You want to have a dedicated personnel for program management. Some organizations, they look at supplier diversity as an add-on function where an individual is doing one job and they add on, hey, why don't you take over supplier diversity as well? And if your organization is not able to hire a dedicated person, it is what it is. However, in order to really move your program and your thought leadership in this area to the next level, I recommend a dedicated personnel. I recommend a dedicated person. And again, this is under the mature stage. And so it's not something that necessarily has to happen immediately if you're not able to, but it's certainly something that your program should grow to. And then having personnel that are experts in what they do. So whether that's getting certified in supplier diversity or being recognized for thought leadership and providing insights and their thoughts and what have you on the topic. So you want to have people that are recognized within their industry as having programs and moving programs that really connect businesses to opportunities. Next slide. So now, finally, we get to the impact and what this means for organizations. So we have our supplier diversity impact circle. So we see here a diverse business wins a contract from a big business. The diverse business hires new workers. The worker pay is circulated back into the local economy. Diverse business is able to expand. The diverse business continues to hire and reinvest in their community. The community is strengthened and thrives. New businesses are formed, creates competitive pricing for the big business because, as we said in the beginning, businesses, big business, they buy from small businesses all the time. And so that is the circle that allows our communities to work and our communities to grow. And when you look at this, this looks much like what you would see with any small business and the impact a small business has on a community. And we know that small business drives every community. However, when it comes to supplier diversity, and I think this is one of the reasons why sometimes we're hesitant to talk about diversity in and of itself, because you can't necessarily talk about diversity without talking about race, but you can talk about it without it being adversarial. And so when you look at where these businesses are, sometimes we have separate communities, and that's okay. That's not a problem. And so when you have a diverse business, they may have a church that they go to that is within an African American or Hispanic community. And so they're able to contribute to those or institutions within their direct community. And so they're able to help bring up or impact that church or that community center or whatever it is in a positive way. And so we want to see, so you don't have a society where part of the community looks and grows and flourishes one way, and then you have another part of the community where there's no investment and it does not grow and it does not thrive. And so it's okay to talk about very specific communities and pockets of communities, because that's just where we are, and that's how we live, and that's what our society is. And so working together, and everybody working together, is how we make our society work and how we make our societies grow stronger together. I think next slide. So that's the presentation for today. I am not sure how we're taking questions, or if Sanjita, you have some questions that have been given to that have been provided through the presentation, but I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I don't know about all of you, but I'm learning a lot from this presentation myself. There is one question that I would like to take here. It's from, let me go, I have to scroll up a little bit. And it's a very specific and technical question. Maybe
Okay.
Brad, do you feel comfortable unmuting yourself and just asking your question, please, Brad?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my question is around the calculation for the spend.
Mm-hmm.
So, a couple of questions around that. So should only certified diverse organizations be included in the calculation? And what about public companies? All of us use Microsoft products, publicly owned by everybody. Should those be excluded? So, what's a valid calculation of the spend?
So my thought on certification is that you don't have to count just certified firms in your spend, because not every firm gets certified. There are a variety of reasons why firms don't get certified, especially if the certification in your area is not free. I never want to tell a firm you must pay for a certification in order for your business to count in my spending utilization reports. And so if you are certified, that's great. If you're not certified, and it might require a little more scrutiny on your part to make sure that they are who they say they are, but I never want to tell a firm that your participation, or even a partner, that a firm's participation is not going to count because that firm is not certified. If you do, there are free certifications available, then certainly you can encourage people to get certified. But again, businesses, it's a lot of paperwork. It's labor intensive, and people decide not to get certified for a variety of reasons. So you can't make people do that. As far as large organizations go, many of them have a program where they might be using diverse businesses for things. But usually that spend with them, and usually that's where you're spending your IT and your IT dollars, Dell and all of those, and those enterprise systems, that is not a part of the spend. So unless they're giving you have a rep that's giving you that second tier spend on a continuous basis, but those types of contracts, that would not be included. And so that's where you also have to look at your organization, because there are some things that where you only buy from those national big companies, because that's just the nature of what they sell, and the nature of what you're buying from them. So you don't have to include them in your spend, and just have that as a separate line item. I've worked with organizations with the same situation, and so we just did not look at the IT as a part of our annual spend, because we didn't want to, it would inflate your numbers, and you have very little participation from IT companies. Unless you have IT contracts that you are spending with small firms, but many organizations don't, then I would not include that as a part of your total spend.
Okay, so they're completely excluded, numerator, denominator, both sides.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. That helps.
You're welcome.
Thank you. There is a really great question here. It says, is a good program always measured by spend? Does it ever include number of distinct diverse suppliers? I can see where a program might have a lot of spend with a couple companies and not spread it out among lots of different diverse suppliers.
So absolutely. And that goes back to the parameters for your organization. And so looking at financial spend is just one metric. Your organization might want to look at although we're spending this amount, but we're also looking at the number of firms that we're working with. And so I've reported information in that way too. We're looking at our direct spend, the financial spend and the dollar amount, but we're also looking at the number of organizations that we're working with. And sometimes the devil is in the details. You might find that you're working with a lot of firms. And so when you're working with a large number of firms, you're impacting those firms and empowering those firms to do other things. And so I would absolutely include that as a metric. It doesn't have to be just looking at the financial spend. The financial spend, though, is just the most popular.
Thank you. I just want to let you know, for some of you who have pitched in some questions here from Nikus, Dana, Terrence, we have 2 more speakers here, and I think some of these questions that you're asking are more suitable to keep it towards the end after we hear the other 2 speakers. And so I don't want you to think we're not taking your questions. I really feel like those questions will be valuable after the 2 speakers. We are just doing a time check. We're doing pretty good on time. I may throw in just a question for us, Kathy, and again, I'm also in this journey of learning about supplier diversity. So what can firms who, in Des Moines, we have a lot of service industries, right? Like, so when I think about what suppliers are we using and diversifying our suppliers and vendors, sometimes we might think it's more important for manufacturing industries, but how can, in larger organizations? So 2 questions, like smaller companies who 50 employees or less, who may not have a lot of products to procure, but we're procuring services. How can smaller organizations who are not manufacturing or are in service industries still diversify their suppliers and have a plan?
So I think you take a tiered and phased approach. So phase 1 could be, you look at what are some common things that you're buying. Office supplies. It used to be travel, but less travel now because we got Expedia, and a lot of people do that on their own. What are some functions that can be outsourced? And so looking at all of those things, looking at taking a holistic view of everything that your organization needs in order for it to function. So you have the office supplies. It could be catering. It could be janitorial in the evenings, having somebody that cleans up. It could be trainings. It could be advertising and communication support. And so just think about what the organization needs in order for it to function, and where are those firms that might be able to provide those services. And then with phase 2, you're looking at, okay, what are some things that we could outsource as a part of our business? So that's when you might look at more specialized firms that might provide professional services. It could be someone, financial services to provide your retirement plan, or it could be someone to provide your insurance benefits for your organization. Does your organization outsource the human resources function? So I think you have to look at it from a tiered approach. What are the low-level, low-hanging fruit, if you will, and then look at, as you move on and on into the organizational structure. Sometimes you might find that it's more cost effective to outsource some things rather than keep it in-house. And so that becomes a capital discussion and a senior leadership discussion, but looking at your organization to see what can we buy immediately, or what do we buy immediately, and then what could we outsource and bring in a consultant to perform and provide for us.
Thank you. I don't know how many sizes of companies and businesses folks are representing, but sometimes when you're a smaller organization, you may think, oh, this seems big for me. I can't, I don't have a lot of contracts, but you can start by looking at minor, small things like, where are we getting our coffee from, our water from? Mm-hmm. In everything that we're doing, we can analyze and evaluate where we're getting it from, and can it be a different supplier? Because we all go to things and people that we all always done the same thing, and it's just our comfort zone. But that's the purpose of this presentation, right? It's for us to allow us to expand our thinking and think broadly, and do new things that we haven't done before to better and improve ourselves.
Absolutely.
So taking a quick time check. Maybe I'll take one more question and then we
Okay.
will roll on to the other two speakers and then we'll take a few other questions. I appreciate your insight and expertise. How do you get companies to buy into supplier diversity programs through their small purchase card spends? We need more buy-in here in Iowa.
That's where you get that buy-in from the department level. So that's a part of as a supplier diversity leader, that internal program, you have to get the departments involved, because your senior leader, he can say and make these announcements and this is what we value. If the departments say I'm not doing it, then it won't get done. And so you have to get these departments on board with this program. If you don't have a formal program in place, that's where, as the supplier diversity lead, you try to advocate for us to, okay, if we have a small purchase that's under $1,000, maybe we can sole source it. Or maybe if it's under $5,000, can we get 3 quotes and require that 1 or 2 of those quotes is from a minority or woman-owned vendor? So you have to be in a position where, if there's no policy in place, how can you create a policy in place? And getting those departments on board and getting those stakeholders on board, you also have to figure out what's in it for them. And so when you have your senior leadership that's saying this is what we're doing, and you are, as the supplier diversity lead, communicating what we're doing and what's happening at the department level to your senior leadership, now everybody is seeing what's really happening. Because the senior leader, they're not always in tune with how things trickle down. They say this is what we're going to do, and then they move on to the next thing. They're not necessarily in the weeds and trying to make sure it gets implemented. So they're relying on you. Okay, I said this is what we're going to do. Now I trust that you're going to get it done. And if it's not happening, you need to come up with ways in order for it to happen. A couple of those ways is like I just provided. If it's less than $1,000, how can you sole source it? Which would mean if you have a vendor that happens to be minority or women-owned, veteran-owned, whatever it is, you're able to just buy from them. If it's 5,000 and below, they have to get those quotes. And that's why the compliance system is also so important, because that then allows you to track what's being spent. And now you know in real time, how much are we spending with these firms?
Awesome. I know I said this was the last, but I think there's one question bubbling on my head because I've heard this question from so many people. Sometimes people don't, if they have not identified themselves as a minority-owned, a veteran-owned, an LGBTQ-owned, or what have you, how do people understand that? How do we get that information? We don't want to make judgments, obviously. What's a good way for us to know the minority-owned businesses in the community?
Well, I think that you can't be in diversity and be uncomfortable with asking a firm who they are and what they are, especially if the firm wants to be considered for opportunities. And so first off, if you have a vendor portal, when they're registering with you as a vendor, then you can get that information in the vendor portal. But if it's not clear and you have to ask, then you just have to ask the question, because you can't assume. There's a lot of value in becoming a minority vendor or woman-owned. And when you start talking about $20 million, $30 million contracts, there's a lot of value in that. And a lot of organizations have shifted where they're increasing the value on getting that diverse participation. And so if it's not clear to you as the person that's looking to do business with the firm, then you just have to ask the question. I was in an organization where we had firms presenting for a contract. It was a construction contract, and they said that they were a woman-owned business. And so I'm looking at the presenters, but I don't see any women. Where are the women? Oh, well, they're back at the office. Well, how can you say that you're a woman-owned business? You don't have a woman in the presentation. And so they said, well, we just didn't bring them. That's not acceptable. You cannot say that you're a woman-owned business or a minority business and we don't see any women here. And so we cannot be uncomfortable with asking a firm, what is your status, if you're making decisions based on that. So if I, I, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
You got it. You have to be comfortable with it.
Yeah. And if you have an existing, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just, and you're not trying to be offensive or what have you. These programs are based on certain things, socioeconomic groups, and so you have to get uncomfortable and say those things and not tiptoe around what it is. And so it's just a part of it.
Yeah, I brought this up because there are several, people I work with who already have a group of existing vendor lists, for example, right? And we've never asked this information before. We've never captured this kind of demographic information before. So A, going forward, we can make sure we somehow capture those. And B, you can still capture those in a form of a survey, some other way and if you explain them while you're capturing this survey, they're more likely to give it to them, happy to give it to them, right?
Put out those parameters. We're asking this because we want to make sure that you're included in this process. We want to make sure that you have access to the information that you need in order to be successful, and that's sufficient.
Awesome. So thank you. I know there are lots of more questions coming in. We'll save those. Kathy, thank you so much for now. Please stick around. I'm sure there will be more questions if we have some more time towards the end, but I'd like to bring in our next awesome speaker here just as soon as I admit this new person coming in. So here, Kathy's contacts are here. And again, we will be sharing the recording of this presentation for those who were not able to come in, and also take it back to your teams. If you want to do sit down with your team and do a lunch and learn or anything like that in your organizations, feel free to use this. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in our next speaker, Jill Lippincott.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of today's discussion. We are happy to sponsor this. Kathy, thank you for such amazing information and helping to get supplier diversity out in front of both organizations that are looking to create a supplier diversity program and vendors who are looking to work with businesses and make that connection between being a diverse supplier and the supplier diversity programs that these organizations may have. I think you're spot on. It's about asking the questions and asking about whether a company is a diverse supplier or whether a company has a supplier diversity program. I did see a question in the chat about, how do you know? And I think that's one question we get very frequently with our program. So sometimes it's just about asking and engaging in that dialogue. So to give a little bit of background about the Targeted Small Business Program, it is a certification program for diverse small business owners. Now, this was talked about a little bit about, should you become certified? And the benefit of our program is that it is free. It is a free third-party certification to identify you as a diverse supplier. And it's offered through the state of Iowa. And originally, I'll give some background. The intention of this was because the state of Iowa itself has a supplier diversity program. And so this certification is what our state buyers recognize. I will say, though, that as we have grown this program, we have more and more businesses utilizing it not to do business with the state, but to use that third-party credential when they are engaging with another business that is that has a supplier diversity program and is asking for that certification. I will say to that example, Kathy, that you provided too, the benefit of having that certification is we can say it is a women-owned, minority-owned small business. So when you do business with them, that's who you're going to be interacting with. And you might not have that situation where if it's a women-owned business and they're all back at the office and you're not seeing that. So that's the value of what we offer with our certification. And just to give a little bit of background, our certification requires 4 elements. That the business must be 51% owned, operated, and actively managed. So we do go into, who is managing the business versus just ownership and who's making day-to-day decisions or making final decisions on things at that 51% level, and operated by a woman, minority, individual with a disability, or service-disabled veteran. Those are the 4 categories that we recognize as a diverse small business owner. The business must be located in the state of Iowa, And that means the headquarters are in Iowa. It's not a branch office here in Iowa. This is to support Iowa companies. And operating for a profit, and when we talk about a profit, that doesn't mean to be making money or revenue. It means that it's a for-profit business versus a nonprofit. So this is for business only. And the annual gross income of less than 4 million. This is how we identify that small business threshold. Now, that seems like a large threshold for many, but we have had businesses in our program that have incrementally grown their revenue and actually have graduated past that amount. And so when they do that, we say congratulations, because although you're no longer eligible for our program, it's been great to see your business grow. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the state of Iowa does have a supplier diversity program. They don't call it that, and so that's one of the things that I'm glad, as supplier diversity is becoming more and more common, we can refer to it as that, because that's essentially what it is. It's an effort to purchase from the vendors that are certified in our program, from women and minorities, individuals with disabilities, and service-disabled veterans. So just to give you some background, because our 2020 fiscal year numbers aren't out yet, but in 2019 fiscal year, the state spent over $44 million with targeted small businesses alone. Now, that's done through a few different ways. There's a bidding process where our businesses get early access to bids that are put out by the state, but also the state can direct purchase from our businesses at a higher threshold than they can direct purchase from general public vendors. And what that means is that rather than going through the bidding process, they can use our online public directory, which is available to state buyers, to any buyers looking for diverse businesses that are certified in our program, to identify potential vendors to do business with, and then work directly with them for any contracts under $25,000. That was recently just increased, actually. It was previously a $10,000 threshold. We looked at the data and the numbers, and we recognized that a lot of purchases were made beyond that $10,000 threshold by the state. So we did increase that just recently through some change in rulemaking. Next slide, please. So in addition to becoming certified, as I mentioned, it isn't just about doing business with the state. There's a number of different things. I'm going to just touch upon them briefly here. But as I talked about, there is that online public portal. I always have to slow down when I say that because it's a mouthful. Online public portal where businesses can search for other businesses who are in our program to do business with as a vendor. You can identify them based upon location, based upon the types of businesses you're including in your supplier diversity program. So it's a really great way to be on a list. And I think a few questions came through about how to identify businesses and diverse businesses. And being in the program puts you on the list that you can be found that way. Before COVID or pre-COVID, we did do networking events. And a lot of these networking events were focused on our small business owners and resource providers. But what we also found happening is we had other companies coming to these networking events to meet diverse business owners to do business with. Oftentimes individuals from city or county administration, as well as the cities and counties are also looking to establish supplier diversity programs. So it was a great opportunity to, again, get connected through this program to those places that might be looking to do business with diverse buyers. As I mentioned, we also offer a number of resources through many partners around the state, but one in particular here that we manage in-house, iasourcelink.com. And it's a great platform for any small business questions that you might have. It connects out to various resource partners around the state, the SBDCs, SBA, et cetera. And I think it's a really great partnership between the small business program and IA SourceLink. We like to say we're the best kept secret here at Iowa Economic Development because people know us for working with big business, but we really do a lot of support for our small business owners. And I also will just throw in here too, that as a part of some of the discussions we've been having recently and looking at how to grow Iowa post-COVID, we've been just discussing the resources that are available and making them more public and promoting them. And that's part of also making improvements to the targeted small business program too. So we all come together as resource providers to acknowledge where are the gaps and what can we be doing better? And I love that our resource ecosystem for small business is really strong here in Iowa. Additionally, we often do promotions through our quarterly newsletter, the Targeted Small Business Newsletter, about what the businesses in our program are doing, highlighting their achievements and efforts in their communities, and just great success stories. Occasionally we have the opportunity to do media as well. And so anytime, we get asked, what are some businesses that are doing X, Y, and Z, we'll go to our directory and offer up a handful of options that meet the criteria that somebody might be looking for. So we really try to help, again, share your story and help you elevate your profile. We do that on social media as well. We do a lot of social media shout outs in various forms and efforts. And just, again, passive marketing for the small businesses in Iowa in our program. This is a screenshot of the directory. So just a much more enhanced directory than we previously had. Allows various types of searching. When searched, a business's profile will come up, logo, a capability statement if they've done any business with the government before. That always helps with some of the government buyers when they're making their decisions about buying as well. So just, again, a much more enhanced platform for your business to be found on. Next slide, please. Just an example of some of the resources that we work with. These are all just partners we worked with in the last 6 to 8 months as we put together various networking events and programming. So again, a lot of connection points, and sometimes I think it's hard to know where to connect to things, and so we're just another avenue to connect to other resource partners. If you don't know where to go, we can help point you there. And then finally, as I mentioned, just some of the media that we have put out there. We've been featured in the Business Record. We highlight businesses in our own platform. We do the newsletter as well. So I'll just touch upon a quick walkthrough of how to become certified. It's generally an application that is filled out online. We do require some documentation. One thing that I'll always offer up, though, is that it isn't if you don't get the documentation right the first time, it's a strict no. We will work with you and go back and forth until we have what we need, and we can make sure to keep your application open as long as that might take to put that all together. So extremely flexible in making sure that you understand what we're looking for, and we can keep working with you on that. And one of the things that we always try to help provide some background and information on is what it is we're looking for. So on our website, iowaeda.com/TSB, you actually can find some information about what type of documentation would be required. We do a review process, and through the review, we'll look at that. And then, like I said, we'll follow up with you if we have any further questions. And I always really like to get to know the businesses in our program through this process, because then when we get a request of, do you have a business in a specific county that's doing a specific type of product or service, we can turn right around and say, yes, actually, and we know of or 2 or 3 people doing that type of thing. So that's always helpful, and that as a part of the review process just helps us to get to know you better. And then once you become certified, you get added to our directory, you get a certificate, you get a window cling, but most importantly, you get to use the logo that identifies you as a targeted small business. And I just talked with a targeted small business owner earlier this afternoon who said that logo is great. She doesn't engage in state purchasing or state as a buyer or as a supplier to the state buyers, but she sells to a company that recognizes diverse small businesses, and it's a retail company, and they sell her products, and they really like the logo on the products because then she can identify, and their customers can identify, that this is a woman-owned business. So it can be utilized in a variety of different ways, but we encourage our program participants to ask the question, if you're not doing business with the state, but doing business with a private buyer, ask the question if they have a supplier diversity program and can your certification be used. And if they are not familiar with the targeted small business program, reach out to us. And we've certainly advocated before. In fact, there was a business or selling retail products to a business in Texas, and the Texas company had not heard of our program, obviously. We reached out and provided information, and then they acknowledged the certification as a third-party credential. Next slide. We may be at the end, but I'm happy to take any questions. And also, just like I said, acknowledge that with the targeted small business program, it doesn't have to just be about state buying. I think that's a great benefit of the program, but can also really help connect you if you are working with other businesses who have established their supplier diversity programs.
Awesome. Thank you, Jill. That was very informative. Maybe there are some questions that are related to that. So what I'm gonna, let me see, what are we on time? Maybe we will go through the next presentation because it's pretty short, and then we can take some more questions, okay?
Sounds great.
Awesome, thank you. Meg?
Okay, thank you. And mine does speak a little more to just some general support that we have out there. So if you could just hop to the next slide, just a reminder that the partnership is a resource for you no matter the size of your business. If you're the corporate side and looking to connect with businesses, we're there for you. If you're on the small business side and looking to grow and connect to the corporations, we're there for you also. Specifically want to call out our COVID response hub. We are putting kind of all of those things that come as a ripple from having the COVID pandemic upon us right now are gathered here as resources for you, and they're all there free for the taking. We've got our DSM Forward playbooks, which talk about some forward-looking guidance, some general reopening guidance, but those are also living documents. So as we continue on this journey through COVID, those are regularly updated. They're sorted by industry, but also by business function. So within your company, if you have someone that specializes in HR, for example, or legal, or if you're a small business and you are all of those things, they're a nice resource for just all the things we need to be thinking about. Our next slide is just a quick screenshot of the Small Business Resources Hub. So all of the content that we create is captured then and categorized by topic here in the Small Business Resources Hub. So as you're looking for inspiration or ideas or a checklist on how to start or what I need to be paying attention to for my taxes, that is all here as well. A quick note on the next slide is our programming that's coming up. We do have a Mentoring for Women event next week, which we're excited about, and we do continue to look at those DSM forward types of topics. So what is next for this industry? What is next for the zoo, for example? A lot of our quality of life amenities and museum types are struggling. So some interesting discussions out there, but always keeping an eye on our small businesses and helping them through this journey. So we've got Designing a Better Normal there, as you'll see as well. I think a final note here is just that we will be hosting our annual Small Business Success Summit online, of course, November 5th and 6th. So we're going to, instead of a full day, we'll break it up into smaller pieces. But, you know, I think our small businesses are some of the most resourceful and creative and innovative folks that I've ever known. And we look forward to providing them a bit of maybe respite to sit back and be inspired and find new ideas again later in November. I do want to just mention a couple of other things. I don't have slides for these, but through the chat, there was some great conversation about events and connectivity, intentional connectivity. Annually, we do partner with IEDA and the TSB on a Meet the Buyers program. So we have corporate purchasing agents attend a half-day session with smaller businesses to make those connections. That was scheduled for mid-April. So it unfortunately is on a back burner right now, but as soon as we start getting those signals back from our corporate purchasing agents that they're ready, we will be engaging them. And Jane, I just reached out to you to see if we can help with the matchmaking piece. So we do intend to keep providing those platforms. It's just has shifted a little bit on our timing and method of connecting that, but keep your eyes open for that. And then I do want to mention with regards to finding diverse suppliers, Jill's program and the TSB is a great way to kind of start locating businesses and making those connections. I also want to call out the Black Iowa Business Directory that locally the Directors Council has published. They've worked really hard on reaching out and making folks self-identify, and so that is a great resource as well. I wanted to just mention that. I believe you can find it at TDC DSM, so it's short for the Directors Council DSM. And then we will also be adding functionality to our own membership directory so that you can sort through and maybe make it a little easier to find our just diverse suppliers in that realm too. So beyond that, I just want to thank you for making the time to be a part of this important conversation today. Thanks.
Thank you. I know we are getting closer to time, and there are some really great questions, and folks want to hear on those questions. So the next question I will take is there a list of active diversity supplier active, sorry, there's two actives in there. Is there a list of active diversity supplier firms available today? What's the URL? And I believe Jane Armstrong from SBA answered that question a little bit, but does someone want to take that question from our panelists? Jill, maybe that will be you.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, just make sure I understand. Is there a list of businesses engaging in supplier diversity or suppliers?
Yeah, it says diversity supplier active firms. So I'm guessing they're asking companies who have a program, right?
Sure. Well, in private companies, I don't know that we have a list, but I think many of them make that pretty public and known in their sites. But I think it goes back to asking the question if they have a program or not. And sometimes it is that they do, and it's just not something that has risen to the surface and information that's available on their online or on their site. But a lot of times it is about asking the question and engaging in that conversation and educating. This is why I think Kathy was such a great speaker for today's topic of educating about the why, and it's about making the business case. And beyond the right thing to do, it's the business case to the stakeholders who are in charge of making those decisions. So I think that's certainly something that we collectively as communities across Iowa can work to better identify those that are doing it and lift those up. One example that we found recently, the city of Cedar Rapids has created a program for disadvantaged businesses. They have no requirements to do that. They're outside of state procurement, so it is not a requirement that they engage with the targeted small business program like our state agencies do, but they've created that because that is something that they want to hold as a priority for their community. So it's a great example of how to do it, and they utilize the targeted small business directory to find the suppliers for their procurement opportunities too. So the more that we see that, I think we also need to be lifting that up and sharing that information broadly. And that's just within Iowa. I'm sure, I know that across the nation, there are a number of companies that lift that up and promote that aspect of their business.
I think that if I could add to that, and if I'm understanding the question correctly, is there a master list of entities that have supplier diversity programs? And so for a small business, you should not base your efforts necessarily on who has a supplier diversity program. You need to base your efforts on your capacity to perform. And so if you start within your local community, start with your local government, your higher education institutions, go to those places that you're interested in, go to their website. The internet is should be your first source of information. Go to their website, see if they have something on the website. And most of the time, if they have a program, they do. If they don't have it on their website, then you call them. But if you're a small business, if you don't have the capacity to do work outside of your geographic area, it doesn't matter if they have a program or not. You can't do it anyway. So look at your local market, see what's available in your local market. And I guarantee you'll also find that there's more than enough work for you to do depending on your capacity. So you might be fine doing work within your local market. So look at that first, and not necessarily look for a list of people with supplier diversity programs. That people, they add their names to lists all the time, but they're not doing anything with any of them. So if you're trying to really build your business with institutional customers, look in your backyard first.
Awesome, thank you. And there's another really great question here. What can we do to also maintain realistic expectations? Sometimes unexpected or poor experience with diverse suppliers, folks tend to quickly jump to generalizations. This is to avoid holding non-white, non-male businesses at unrealistically higher standards. There are a couple of things there in that question, but maybe we'll start with Kathy on that question.
Well, that's common. And I think as the supplier diversity leader, you have to be the voice you're the advocate. You're the person that stands up and says that, so what? They don't have XYZ. Large firms mess up on projects too. They do stuff too all the time. They just have lawyers and can sue and do other things. And so our job is to put them in a position where they can perform. We're doing workshops, but really the best, we can do all the workshops we want to, the best way to perform and learn is on the job. And so they have to, at some point, get on the project and learn the process so that they can perform and they know how the organization works. And so as the lead, you have to be that voice to say, I know that they have not performed at the certain level that a larger company has, but we're here to provide them with that support. I've had many businesses, and I also work with small businesses and tell them, you can't come in and mess up. If I advocate for you, you can't come in and not turn in your things in a timely manner or do certain things. It doesn't give you a hall pass not to perform at a certain level. So there's culpability on both sides, and just making sure that each side knows what that is. And so the whole thing about the success of a program is the realistic expectation. That's the bottom line. You can't have this high pie in the sky expectation of a small business, but you let the big business slide. You can't do that.
And I would
Can I add
also,
to that, Jill?
yeah, that I think this is also, supplier diversity is one aspect of overall commitment to diversity and inclusion and equity. And so one of the things that we're doing with our agency is, in addition to supplier diversity, is a number of trainings and workshops and discussions, and in some cases, those uncomfortable conversations that Kathy talked about having, to make this a broader part of our overall efforts for diversity and inclusion, so that we address unconscious bias, we address the things that come up in purchasing that make it difficult for our vendors because of somebody else's past experience too.
Mm-hmm. And they have to feel comfortable in you as the lead and saying what's really going on. And sometimes it's not pretty, but you're there to, okay, this is the situation, but we got to have those conversations. You can't advocate effectively if you don't know what's really going on. And so if you hear something, is this true? You can go back to your team. Is this true? Is this the case? Why is that? And talk through it. But you have to be able to and willing to go through it and say, we have to change this.
Manisha, if I didn't do justice to your question and you would like to add on to it or ask, please let us know. Otherwise, I'm going to take another question in the meantime. Let's see. How would you begin canvassing small businesses to ask if they have licensure, insurance, etc., or if they would like assistance in development?
Can you repeat? How do you go about asking them?
Yeah. Collins, if you're still on the call and you would like to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself.
Sure. Yes, sure. This is Collins Uttle. I'm the Organizational Equity Coordinator with the City of Dubuque. And there are minority-owned businesses within the city, and there are community lists that are being distributed amongst, again, community members. But knowing personally some of those business owners, I know that this is, in some ways, a kind of a side hustle for them. They don't have their EIN numbers. They don't have licenses. They don't have some insurance. So
okay,
we would want to work with them, but at the same time to uplift them as a business, or support the community list as is, without knowing the capacity, without knowing the legitimacy of the business is something else. So we know where they are, but then asking that next question of, do you have this, that, and the third, without coming across as being either condescending or insulting of what they have done is something that our economic development department is wrestling with.
Well, if I can take that question. What was your name again?
Collins.
There is no being disrespectful about it. You have to have an EIN number. You have to have insurance. If it's a certain thing, you have to have it. You can't, if you're a caterer and you don't have a certain amount of insurance, we can't have you serving food at our organization and then somebody gets sick, because now we're at fault. And so those are some basic things that you have to have, and either they want to grow their business or they don't. So I think that And I hear what you're saying. I work with a lot of businesses like that too. And I have to have those conversations. Either you want to do this or you don't. It's very easy, very simple. And if you're not interested, okay, that's fine. You don't have to. But if you are interested, these are the things that we have to have. Now, if it's an issue where it's a challenge for them to do the paperwork or submit the information online, then you can provide support to help them do that. But and the bottom line is a lot of businesses are that way. They're in that boat. They don't want to submit their taxes. They don't want to submit their information. They don't want the government to know certain things. And okay, then that is what it is. And so you can only move forward with the firms that are willing to take that next step. I can't make you get this information if you're not interested. So that's common, but that's an easy one.
Yeah, and I can add to that too. I mean, we require that for the certification for the same reasons that Kathy has offered. And so that's, I think sometimes maybe the benefit of requiring the TSB certification, for instance, is that gets built into that requirement. We've checked for licensing and insurance for certain categories. We have taxes and we can verify that legitimacy. But also, we also offer up, it's a business decision. And if you don't want to participate in the certification program, that's fine too, but that is our requirements. And so that helps that we can be that third party requirement to ask those types of questions. And then those in the directory are those that have those built into their business.
I just wanted to add to this conversation that I feel like this is where public entities, chambers, cities, have a role to maybe provide education. If they have the right education, they understand what it is, they understand they need to have this for these reasons, and this is what will allow them to grow. And after that, they make their decision. They don't want to do that, it's their decision. Mm-hmm. But working in many immigrant communities and being a first-generation immigrant myself, there's a lot to learn, right? Like, you can't assume people know all these things. Because you get a certification, you have a bigger pool to be considered for things of that nature. So I think I hope that answered your question, Collins.
It did, yes.
I'd like to add something else. This is also an area where organizations, where you look at your policies. Do we need for a business to have this much bonding or this much insurance in order to do business with us? By law, at least in Florida, for construction projects, you only have to have at least $100,000 project in order to require a bond. So if that's the case, anything below 100 grand, you don't need a bond, which then removes a barrier. So look at the policies that are in place to see, do we really need all of the things that we say that we need? We might not need it, but the EIN number, those things you do need, that's the IRS. There's nobody can get around them. So, but certain things that might be a barrier, having that, do you need $1 million in insurance? Maybe not. So look at those things as well to see what can we remove in order to remove a barrier.
We are very close to time. I wondered if I was able to give an opportunity for Terrence Thames to ask his question. I don't know if you're still on the line. He says
see a bunch of questions. I can sit or stay and answer a few more if we need to. I'm okay with that. I see a lot of activity in the chat, so I'm not sure how many questions are there, but if I need to stay, I can.
Sure. No, thank you. Oh, Terrence is here. Terrence, you will have the last question. Go ahead.
Oh, great. No, thank you. And this has been a great conversation. Thank you, everyone. Friends. The last question was around legislation. I know in some states, the MBE certification is broken up. I know in our state with the TSB program, it does include veterans and women. And then so when you look at the numbers for a full target small business program, disproportionately ethnic minorities are still getting a very, very small share of businesses, which when it comes to MBEs, minority-owned businesses getting contracts, it can be still disproportionate where we still have some of the same problems. So is there any legislation, for one, coming up or on the books that would mandate a certain annual spend for one, targeted small businesses? Because right now we don't, and we see it's hard to get that climb from a state standpoint. But two, is there any thought around breaking out some of the minority or diverse spend, so you break it up so minority-owned businesses can kind of be broken out separate from women-owned and veteran-owned?
I can address, what I'm aware of on a couple different fronts. I think I mentioned we're having a lot of discussions among stakeholders, small business owners, about the targeted small business program and procurement. And I do think there is some things to address there, and whether it's specific percentages or having a revamp of how the language is written and how the spending goes. I think there's, opportunity for growth. It does require legislation. You're right. And so that's certainly a place where, the community supporting that and contacting their legislators is the way that we get that done. It would require that process. And that legislative process doesn't happen overnight. I was just educating my son about kind of how we actually start in the fall, beginning for the spring legislation. So that's something that we can start now. It takes a while to put together, but I think if you're contacting your legislators now and putting it out there in front of them, it's certainly something that, as you get some traction with that, you can start now. It can start right away. You don't have to wait for the legislative session. The other thing, though, I would also just offer is that distinction among the businesses. I don't know that I've heard that come forward, but again, that would likely be a legislative type of piece coming forward. I do think that there is room for improvements across the board, and so we'll continue looking to looking at what that looks like, and talking with our stakeholders in conversations like these. And I know Angela Jackson's been a part of these conversations the last few weeks, and just always open to making it better and growing it and getting that feedback. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I will add, Jill. Jill made a very good point. It's in the legislature hands and what you're advocating for. So you look back a few years ago, affirmative action programs, these diversity programs, where they were before MWBE program, which Minority Women Business Enterprise, they were very specific in who they were trying to help. And then you had a system that challenged a lot of those things and said you can't discriminate, or you can't set aside things based on ethnicity or gender and all of those things. And so you saw the transition to small business programs, which was kind of a catch-all in diverse business programs, which was a kind of a catch-all for everything. And so when you have a kind of a catch-all like that, unless you have a disparity study, which says that we have a disparity in contracting in our community, and which requires us to focus on specifically minority businesses or women-owned businesses or whatever it is very difficult to have a program where it could not potentially be challenged. And so most organizations, they don't want to go to court for this. And so they'll say small and diverse, and it's a catch-all, and you do what you can. But as a supplier diversity leader, if you have an emphasis and like to see that group grow, then that's where you're doing workshops and actively going out and getting businesses to participate in your program. And so you can't, it's hard to say we specifically want to see this happen, and you have to just be very careful about that. And so that's why, and I will say, with the change and the move away from very specific and targeted programs, we have seen a lot of minority firms opt out of it. And so you're not seeing the numbers in the growth that you'd like to see, because it's been kind of a catch-all and watered down type of approach and program. And so we've had to change things. You see under the transportation, they have a disadvantaged business program. So it's like where colleges have a first generation program. We know who we want to be included. We just can't specifically say that. So you have to be strategic about the programming that you're offering and what you're doing, so that you can get the businesses, or at least provide support to the businesses that you'd like to see benefit in your program. Disparity studies cost $100,000 or more. And so, and you get a bunch of legalese just to say, oh yeah, we're not giving enough contracts to minority firms. I'm not saying that disparity studies are not good. They provide the legal basis for you to have a very specific program, but you don't need a disparity study to tell you we're not getting contracts to minority or women-owned businesses like we like. You don't have to spend 150 grand to tell you that. But you do have to spend 150 grand so that you won't get sued. And yeah, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the federal government is the only organization that can say, we want these contracts to go to a specific group. They're the only ones that can do that.
Well, we have taken more time than we've asked for, and thank you for sticking around with us. This was a great conversation. I hope all of you took something from here and will share this with somebody else within your organization that needs to know if they were not able to participate, and make a commitment to look at all your purchasing that's happening in your own organizations and do one thing differently to make that change and be that change that we all want to see in this world. So with that, I want to thank our speakers, our keynote speaker today, Kathy, and our sponsor, Iowa Department of Economic Authority. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in some of our other events.
Thank you.